Keith Johnstone proposes in his book, Impro, which has completely shaped the landscape of improvisation today, a concept that he calls status theory. Status theory is composed of multiple layers. It's the idea that we, being social animals, who evolutionarily, according to Darwinian natural selection, would like to survive and would like to avoid fights. We avoid these fights by putting ourselves in a pecking order. There's animals that are at the top, and it goes down the list. And in different points along these lists, different organisms act in different ways, in different status. I'm here sitting on the floor because I'm lowering my status. If I was standing and maybe holding my chest out a little bit more, that might be higher status. The idea here is that somebody that's acting high status is scaring away fights by saying, I'm strong, don't fight me. And somebody that's acting low status is avoiding the fight by saying, I'm weak, I'm not worth it. That's where the idea of the fetal position comes from. Some other examples of body language and how it implies status is that exposing one's neck is low status. Touching one's face is low status. Not making eye contact or making it only for brief seconds is low status, while high status is making strong eye contact and maintaining it. And if you look away, you don't look back because you're ignoring whoever you looked away from, and you don't care about them. High status is composed of more open posture, more comfortable posture. That's the high status, this posture that's so comfortable that you're not even afraid somebody's going to fight you because you're so confident. High status is slow movement. There's all the time in the world. While low status is a lot of head movement, a lot of jerking around, a lot of closed posture close to your arms close to your torso. Now, why is status so important for leadership? Well, status is like the water for leadership. It's there no matter what. Leadership is composed of hierarchies. Organizations have a hierarchy with the CEO, followed by other officers, and eventually lower level employees. And in any sort of organization, everybody's constantly playing status, and everybody's constantly trying to maintain the status that they belong to. The CEO is trying to maintain his high status. I interviewed Dan Klein, who is an expert on improvisation, and he teaches TAPS 103, the improvisation class at Stanford. He explained to me how status relates to bragging. A naked attempt to brag, for example, a traditional humble brag, is actually lowering your status, according to Dan Klein. It means that you are not confident enough with yourself, that you feel like you need to try and raise your status. It's a naked attempt to try and raise your status, and because of that, it lowers it. Now, where status theory becomes so useful for understanding leadership is when you combine it with the framework for leadership invented by Lord and Brown. Lord and Brown proposed the idea that a leader changes the self-concept of his followers, and status is dynamic in that when one person has their status change, other people's have their status change too. It is impossible, according to Keith Johnstone, that somebody's status changes without the other people in the group having their status change somehow as well. Now, most often, this is a zero-sum game. Most often, according to Keith Johnstone, if somebody's status goes up, somebody else's status must go down. He calls this the seesaw principle. So what would this mean about bragging? Well, according to Dan Klein, and logically following Keith Johnstone's idea, if somebody successfully brags and raises their own status, it must mean that somebody else's status is lowered. Now, if you're the follower and your self-concept is lowered, your status is lowered, you feel less important, would you want to feel like you should follow this leader? Would you follow this leader now that you're even farther apart? You might be more likely to obey. You might have lower confidence, lower status body language. But you're not going to be very happy. You're not going to be very happy to follow this leader. You might continue to because you're required somehow by the positions to obey what is being told. But you're not going to follow as effectively as a follower who has his self-concept grow in status. Dale Carnegie wrote a book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, that has been a best-selling book for decades and has been absolutely transformative in the landscape of leadership. And in particular, Dale Carnegie suggests that leaders have to make people feel important. You have to make your followers feel important. You have to praise every small improvement, and you have to be lavish in your praise. These are the words of Dale Carnegie. Now that we put this together with Lord and Brown's idea of self-concept and Keith Johnstone's idea of status, everything comes together to form a perfect context for this particular research on bragging and its effects. What is the difference between a naked attempt to brag that can either higher or lower your status, but at the end of the day is going to make it harder to lead? What is the difference between that and the ability to communicate milestones effectively in a way that makes your followers want to continue following you? If you're Steve Jobs and you're presenting the iPhone, you want everybody on your team from that day forward to be 10 times more motivated to keep making the phone better and better and better. That means that you have to be very sensitive to how you're altering your follower self-concept when you communicate such an amazing achievement as the invention of the iPhone. At the end of the day, you can't avoid bragging in this context because you're a salesman. You have to announce to the world this wonderful technology that you've been working on. And it's of utmost importance that the leader knows how to do this in a way that keeps the followers with a high self-concept of themselves. In the next section of the paper, I'm going to provide evidence of how students at Stanford and other leaders at Stanford are able to communicate in a way that is productive and collaborative and is not a zero-sum game when it comes to status. How are leaders able to raise not only their own status, but also their followers' status?